But a couple of things. Right now, I'm not the moderator for this. Natan in the office at Torah. I think that basically covers the issues. If there are any questions, as I said, please don't hesitate, and we'll try to do it with this technology. And as we move along, hopefully, when this is all over, we'll still remember how to give a shiur face to face, though not promising anything. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at the topic of the shiur. I saw in the memos the question of giving a Zoom Seder. That came up in the headlines yesterday. I have what to say about it, but I'm not going to say anything about it today. Maybe at some other time we'll discuss that. But I do want to discuss the Seder here in terms of the imagery of the Matza on the Leil HaSeder. And as what I hope that we'll see as we go along, that the imagery of the Matza is something which is not, I wouldn't necessarily call it complicated, but it's certainly complex and multivariate, and this gives us a different sense of what we're doing when we're eating the matzah on Leil HaSeder. I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 different variations, and they're all primarily within the, if you will, the halachic side of things, not even within the agadic side, though of course the question of the machshava, of the philosophy behind the mitzvah, is going to play an important role, as we will see. But as by means of introduction, I want to take a pasuk that we're all familiar with from the end of Parshat Bo, but it's a pasuk that we're familiar with because it is the part of the Haggadah, specifically the answer of the person who is running the Seder to the son who is the Rasha, the evil son. V'higata levincha bayom hahu lemor, and I'll use my cursor a little bit so you can follow along. I hope everyone, if you can't see the screen, please send Natan a message right away, because I'm going to be using the makorot on your screen, and it's important that in order of the shiur, of course, you've printed out the makorot that were sent, you can follow along there as well. In the first source here, v'higata levincha bayom hahu lemor, ba'avur ze asa Hashem li b'tzeitim miMitzrayim. And I'm going to take the translation as it appears in the JPS. And you shall explain to your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. Well, if you take a look at that pasuk, this translation is following the understanding of the great Spanish grammarian Rabbi Yonah ibn Janach from the 10th century. And he's quoted by the Ibn Ezra in his commentary. Basically, what Ibn Janach says is Perush ba'avur zeh. If you take a look at the pasuk is really flipped. The way that we normally understand it is what we're telling the son, that why are we doing this avodah, right? The avodah hazot lachem. Why are you doing this avodah? So we answer, ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeitim miMitzrayim. It is because of this being taken out of the what Hashem did for me. We went out of Egypt, and as a result, we are keeping these various mitzvot. We are doing this Seder that we are so familiar with. The problem is that the pasuk doesn't read that way. The pasuk really reads, "Ba'avur zeh," because of this, asa Hashem li b'tzeitim miMitzrayim. Because of what I'm doing, that's why God took me out of Egypt. If you're taking a look at it literally, ba'avur zeh, because of this, asa Hashem li b'tzeitim miMitzrayim. This is why God did this for me in Egypt. So the pasuk is something which is seems to be flipped, and the Ibn Ezra quotes Rav Marinus. That's his Latin name. Marwan was his Arabic name. But we know him as Ibn Janach. Perush ba'avur zeh haya ra'ui liot hefech zeh ba'avur sh'asa Hashem li. So basically, he says the way that you're supposed to be reading it is because of all of the things that God did for me. I'm doing the Seder. Vehevi rabim kemau l'da'ato. And he brought many examples of this phenomena in Tanakh, where the syntax is flipped, but really the intent is that in this particular case is that because of what God did to me, we are doing this Seder the way that the JPS translates it, the way that we understood it in the Seder. I would argue that if not 100% of the participants right now, certainly 99% of them. I don't know how you get to 99% when you have 40 participants, but that's your problem. But anyway, most of you would have said that's exactly what the way we've always understood it. However, the Ibn Ezra says absolutely not. Ulefi da'ati en echad mehem nachon. Right? None of the examples that Ibn Janach brings, which he doesn't bring here, but none of the examples are correct. Ki eich nahafoch, a beautiful idea. Eich nahafoch divrei Elohim chayim. How can we possibly flip and reverse the words of the living God? So he says the following: Tam hapasuk hefech machshavto. So the proper, correct understanding of the pasuk is the exact opposite of the way that Ibn Janach says it. Ki ein anachnu ochlim matzot ba'avur zeh. We're not eating the matzot because God took us out of Egypt. Rak perush ba'avur zeh, ba'avur zot ha'avodah, shehu achilat ha'matzah, v'lo ye'achel chametz. Because of this service to God, namely the eating of the matzah and the refraining from chametz, shehu tchilat ha'mitzvot shetziva lanu Hashem, which is amongst the first mitzvot that God has commanded us, asalanu Hashem otot ot she'otzianu mimitzrayim. It is because of this that God made the miracles for us. In other words, and I'll look at the English side of it. This translation is basically mine. In other words, Hashem only took Bnei Yisrael out of Egypt in order that they should serve Him, in keeping with the pasuk. That at the very beginning, because as you can see, it's Shmot Perek Gimel, when Moshe is being spoken to at Har Sinai with the bush, and here the pasuk says, "Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim." This is, excuse me, that's the wrong pasuk. Kakatuv ba'otziacha et ha'am miMitzrayim tavdun et Elohim al har hazeh. When you take this people out of Egypt, so you will worship God on this mountain. That is the purpose. So the purpose, so basically Ibn Ezra says, so what God is saying is just the opposite of what we normally think. It's not that we're eating matzah because we were freed. Rather, we were freed in order to allow us to do the mitzvot. That the mitzvot have this, if you will, this deep spiritual purpose, this deep spiritual goal, which in effect becomes the rationale for the historical process. This is I saw a similar idea quoted in the name of the Beit Halevi, the Rav Yosef Dov Rav Yashav Ber Soloveitchik, the great grandfather of Rav Soloveitchik. But here it's the Ibn Ezra saying it, that basically the purpose of the Yetziat Mitzrayim is to allow us to do the mitzvot. So, and here specifically with regard to the Achilat Matzah. So if that is the case, and even if it's not the case, even if we take the more conventional understanding of the Ibn Janach, albeit the difficulty that occurs in the reading of the Psukim because of it, it really behooves us to try to have a deeper understanding of what we are accomplishing by eating the matzah. And here I want to take a look at the psukim, at least some of the psukim that are brought in the Torah, and see how they lead to different approaches, which are parallel, some of them may be, I wouldn't say that they're in contradiction to one another. I think that they're in parallel, but they add layers of depth to understanding our experience at Leil HaSeder. So let's start with the very beginning. Perek Yud Bet, here's source number 3. This is within the context of the command that Moshe receives today, actually. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim, that this month of Nisan is the beginning. Presumably, God spoke to him on Rosh Chodesh, or immediately before Rosh Chodesh, and gave him the commands for the subsequent 2 weeks, which were going to culminate at Leil HaSeder, at that night of the first Korban Pesach. By the way, this might be the understanding why in the Haggadah we say Yachol Me Rosh Chodesh. This is just parenthetic to what we're talking about, but where the Baal Haggadah brings the idea Yachol Me Rosh Chodesh Talmud Lomar Bayomahu. So why would I have thought that you should say the Haggadah on starting from Rosh Chodesh? Why would we have that? Where would we have that Havamina? Why would I even think that that's a possibility? After all, it's Chag HaPesach. So the answer, I believe, is that here you have this notion that Chag HaPesach really begins with HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, because this is when the command was given. So I might think that I should already be beginning to have this discussion that we're familiar with from that time. Okay, but within that context, when we reach the nitty-gritty of that first Leil HaSeder, when we're supposed to take, they were in Egypt supposed to take the sheep, and they were supposed to slaughter it, put the blood on the doorposts, etc. And the Torah says, "Va'achlu et habasar balayla hazeh, tzli esh umatzot, al mirorim yochluhu." Right? Eat the flesh that is roasted with the matzot, with the unleavened bread, and the bitter herbs you shall eat it. Now, the obvious question is, why should you be eating it with matzah? The maror, we might understand, has the idea, the familiarity that we have with the notion of the bitterness of the Egyptian experience. But what is the matzot? We're going to be saying a little bit later, the Torah will say in Pasuk Lamed Tet of Perek Yud Bet, when describing the actual Exodus, Vayafu et habatzek asher hotziu mimitzrayim ugot matzot kilo chametz. They baked the dough in an unleavened way because it was not chametz. Ki garshu mimitzrayim, they were chased from Egypt. V'lo yachlu litmamea v'gam tzeda lo asu lahem, and they weren't able to pause, and they had not prepared any. Well, this is the old JPS translation. Prepared any victuals. Now that happens afterwards. In other words, that's the following morning. Why? Why were they already eating the Korban Pesach with matzot, if only the following morning did their dough not rise? Right? That's an obvious question. The night of Pesach, they should have been able to eat it with whatever, with rolls and what have you. Why are they only eating it? Why were they already told to be eating it with matzah if that was only going to historically occur a few hours later? This, by the way, touches on the greatest miracle to my mind of Yetziat Mitzrayim was that that morning they're leaving, and 2 million or so Jewish mothers and grandmothers, and no one prepared a sandwich. How is it that they left with the dough? And nobody had thought, well, if we're leaving the following morning, maybe, just maybe, we should prepare something in advance. Right? I'm going to leave that question in the air for the moment, but I think we should come back to it. I'm saying it tongue in cheek, but I think that it's a serious question that needs to be addressed. Really, why didn't they prepare? Why didn't they know that they were going out and that they had to have food? Why were they suddenly so harried to go out? But the question that needs to be addressed first is this idea of Sliesh umatzot amorim yachluhu, and then God continues and says, this is how you're going to eat the Korban Pesach. You're going to eat it harried, b'chipazon Pesach hu Lashem, and that's a play on words. The chipazon and the Pesach is a flip of those two words. Was you're going to be eating this in a harried manner, and God tells Moshe that he's going to be killing the firstborn. He's going to pass over our homes, and pasuk Yudalid Haya Hayom Hazel Lachem Lezikaron V'Chagotem Oto Chag, and this day, presumably the day of the 14th, not the day of the 15th, is going to be a chag for you for all generations. When I say that the day of the 14th, the day that they brought the Korban Pesach, they would eat it the night between the 14th and the 15th. Not going to get too much into that right now because that will take us too far afield with regard to Pesach as opposed to Matza. But afterwards, Shivat Yamim Matzot Tochelu. Okay, but on 7 days, you're going to be eating the matzot. And again, the matzot are being spoken about without the historical reference. All of these psukim, I want to stress this, right? Pasuk chet through pasuk tet vav here, this is before they have even taken the sheep and put it aside. Only in pasuk chaf aleph, which I did not bring here, and I apologize for that, I should have, but only starting in pasuk chaf aleph does Moshe tell, if later on you have a chance, take a look in your Chumashim, Perek Yud Bet, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, and onwards. That's where Moshe speaks to Bnei Yisrael and tells them to be about the Korban Pesach. So why do we have these matzot? Okay, so now we've already seen two different references to the matzah. We've seen reference number one before they left Egypt, when they're told to eat it with the Korban Pesach. We see reference number two as based on their leaving the following morning. V'lo yachlu lehit mamea, they couldn't rest, and therefore their dough did not rise. There's a third reference in, there are other references as well, but in terms of the rationale, there's this third reference, Lo tochal alav chametz, shivat yamim tochal alav matzot lechem oni, ki b'chipazon yatzata me'eretz Mitzrayim. So here we have a reference in Sefer Dvarim, bringing the Korban Pesach, and when you bring the Korban Pesach, you should not eat chametz with it for 7 days, and you will only eat the matzot, and here the matzot are referred to as the lechem oni, the bread of affliction, which we'll come back to. So these are your three references in the psukim. Now, because of the slightly shortened shir, I'm going to skip the fifth source right now, and I'm going to go to the Mishnah here, number 6, the Mishnah in Psachim, in Perek Yud. The Mishnah says that it's a familiar Mishnah because it's quoted in the Haggadah, but we're going to see that the way that the Mishnah speaks is not exactly the way that the Haggadah brings it. The Mishnah says the following: Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer, Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach, lo yatsa yedei chavato, ve'elu hen, Pesach matzah umaror. So the three mitzvot, whoever does not mention these three things did not fulfill his obligation. Which obligation we will see in a moment, but what are they? Pesach, matzah, and maror. And then Mishnah says what we have to say. Pesach, al shum shepasach hamakom al batei avotenu b'Mitzrayim. The reason why we're eating the Korban Pesach is because God passed over our fathers' homes in Egypt. Matza, al shum shenigalu avotenu b'Mitzrayim, because our forefathers were redeemed in Egypt. Now, it's been a year since we read the Haggadah. I want to go down to what the Haggadah says. Number 10, Matzah zo sha'anu ochlim al shuma, al shum shelo hispik b'tzeikam shel avotenu la'achmitz ad shenigla aleihem melech malchei amlachim hakadosh baruch hu uga'alam. Why do we eat the matzah? Because their dough didn't rise until God took us out. And then he quotes the pasuk that we read before. So this idea, something's gone awry, because here in the Mishnah it just simply says because our fathers were redeemed in Egypt, and now in the Haggadah when we're quoting that Mishnah, we say it's because their dough did not have a chance to rise. That's why we're saying it. That's the issue. So if that's the case, like, why is that why did we change from the Mishnah? So I think the answer is the following. One of the primary themes of the matzah, right? We're saying, as I said at the beginning, there are different themes to matzah. One primary theme of matzah is the accoutrement, the accompaniment to the Korban Pesach. In other words, independent of the fact, let's say they had never left, right, Egypt in the way that they did. Now, one could say that this is, of course, that the halacha precedes the history, and maybe that gets back to that Ibn Ezra that I said earlier. But if even had they not left Egypt the way they did, the Torah is telling us to eat the Korban Pesach together with the matzah. That eating with the matzah is the idea that the matzah is basically an accompaniment to the Korban Pesach. Some of the Rishonim, for example, and the Mefarshim point out that other korbanot also have bread. If we take the most obvious the most obvious comparison would be to the Korban Todah, to the Thanksgiving offering, and Korban Pesach might be a form of a Thanksgiving offering. So a Thanksgiving offering is brought with loaves of bread. In fact, 40 loaves of bread, 4 different types of bread. 3 of those types are matzah. 1 of the types is chametz. But there is bread which is associated that you're eating together with your korban. So similarly, one might argue that what you are doing is you are eating the bread of the Korban Pesach, and the bread of the Korban Pesach is matzah. Now, we still have to ask, why should it be matzah as opposed to other forms of bread? And maybe we'll get back to that in a little bit. But right now, I want to just focus on it being the bread of the Korban and how that impacts on the halacha. The way that it primarily impacts on the halacha is in the following way. We're familiar with the following line of the Mishnah, because it's again quoted in the Haggadah, in our answer to the Chacham, our answer to the wise son. We say, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikoman. And there's the way that Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikoman, we do not eat anything after that, the Korban Pesach. It's also Ein maftirin achar, the way that the Rashbam here quotes it, Ein maftirin achar hamatzah afikoman. Right, in our Seder today, when we don't have the Korban Pesach, who knows, Bezrat Hashem, maybe in 2 weeks' time we will have the Korban Pesach again. There'll be a little irony, I guess, that the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt, but we'll all be in quarantine and we won't be able to go. But okay. Anyway, ein maftirin achar matzah afikoman. So we don't eat anything after the afikoman. We're all familiar with that halacha. And the Rashbam says the following in his commentary to the Gemara in Pesachim. Tzarich le'echol matzah b'gmar sudato. Today, we must eat the matzah at the end of the meal, at the end of the Seder. Zecher le'matzah ha'ne'echelet im ha'pesach b'kricha. As a remembrance of the matzah that was eaten together in a sandwich, together with the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach, the Hillel sandwich that we have korech for, was probably the way most people ate the Korban Pesach. Whether they had to halachically or not, the way to eat a Korban Pesach was to eat it as a lafa. I mean, you would take it, it was basically shwama. You would cut your meat, you would put it into your pita, a lafa-like pita. You'd have your maror, which was your charif. I guess if you were Temani, you added more maror. And you wrapped it up and you ate it together. Bizohi matzah bitsua, and this is the broken piece of matzah. Matzah bitsua, the broken matzah that anu achlin ba'achrona l'shem chova. When we eat that half of matzah that was hidden at the beginning of the Seder, and we eat it for the afikoman, that, according to the Rashbam, and according to this is a primary opinion amongst the Rishonim, and it's brought lahalacha as well, this is the real kiyum hamitzvah of matzah. We eat a lot of matzah in the Seder. We start with motzi matzah, then we go and we eat korech, maybe we eat a little matzah in shulchan orech during the meal, and then we eat more matzah at the afikoman. The Rashbam's understanding is that the mitzvah of achilat matzah is really being fulfilled at the very end with the afikoman, because that was the matzah that was eaten with the Korban Pesach. And since we go back to that very first pasuk, al matzot u'merim yochluhu, right? That is what we were doing. Matzot u'merim yochluhu. This is where we were supposed to be eating the matzah in the first place. We were going to be eating it together with the Korban Pesach. Today, even though we're not eating with the Korban Pesach, in the Beit HaMikdash, when they were eating it with the Korban Pesach, it was understood that that was the primary matzah. Today, that still remains the primary matzah. He has a problem. He says, well, if that's the case, why do we make the bracha at the beginning? So he says that is because we have no choice. Once we're eating the matzah, we have to make a bracha. But and we eat the matzah at the beginning of the meal. But because all of our meals start with bread. But the real kiyum hamitzvah of achilat matzah is focused on the matzah of the Korban Pesach. That is the way that the Rashbam understands it. The Rosh, and this is the other deya, says that no, the otam matzah eina l'shem chova. He says this matzah is not chova. Okay, this is not this is not being used for the obligation. Right, this is not the obligation that we're referring to, because after all, we've already been eating matzah all night. However, it's zecher lepesach. He says that it's not zecher to the matzah of Pesach, but it's zecher of the Pesach. So this is two conflicting ways of understanding it. Either way, you're saying that the matzah has, even in our Seder, hasn't totally lost the Pesach aspect of it, but the primary focus, according to the Rosh, is no longer on the Korban Pesach. According to the Rashbam, even today it remains on the Korban Pesach, which is why we fulfill the kiyum hachilat matzah, the obligation to eat matzah, really at the end of the Seder, more than at the beginning of the Seder. There are those who have the following, I don't know, we call it somewhere between minhag and halachic practice, to eat two different kizeitim, two different shiurim of olive size at the end of the Seder. One, to fulfill the idea of the rush, that we're eating this korban, this matzah, as a zecher to the korban pesach itself, and the other to take the idea of the rashbam, that we are eating a kizayit of the matzah. So to fulfill both of those ideas, it's kind of difficult to be eating all that matzah. Everyone has to deal with their what their digestive tracts are going to allow them to have. You have to worry about digestive tractates and digestive tracts. So here, in terms of that, to try to eat, excuse me, two kizeitim of matzah, one zecher the matzah and one zecher the korban pesach, but that's the theme of the idea of al matzot umorim yochluhu, that you're eating the matzah as a part of the korban pesach ceremony. Now, we're going to get back to, please hold in mind, why should we be eating the matzah with korban pesach? That still has to be addressed. Perhaps on one level, as I said, it might just be the bread which is eaten with korbanot in general, and this is the bread of korban pesach. But perhaps there's more to it than that. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. Before we get to that, I wanted to discuss a major problem that occurs. You may be familiar with the following idea. And this is based on the Gemara in Pesachim. The Gemara raised this. Amar Rava, matzah bizman hazeh deoraita umaror derabanan. Matzah today is deoraita, but eating maror is only derabanan. And the Gemara asks, Maishna maror, why is maror any different? And the answer is al matzot umorim. It's interesting that the Gemara takes the pasuk from Pesach Sheni. I don't want to get into why right now, but the same idea that you are supposed to be eating the korban pesach, or the korban pesach Sheni, if you were to eat it a month later in Iyar, and you're supposed to be eating it with matzot umorim. So the Gemara says, Bizman de'ika pesach, yesh maror. Ubizman de'leka pesach, leka maror. So when there is a korban pesach, so then you have maror, and when there isn't a korban pesach, so then there is no maror. That's the way that Rava says it. However, if that's the case, why then the Gemara says matzah nabi? Why isn't matzah any different? Because after all, there is no. It says al matzot umorim yochluhu. So here, the Gemara's response is matzah mehadar harda beikra be'erev tochlu matzah. Matzah has a different pasuk, the pasuk of be'erev tochlu matzot, that you are supposed to be eating the matzah together with, not together with, that you have a chiyuv to eat the matzah independently of the korban pesach. Maror, it never has that command being repeated. Matzah, it does. This is not the only opinion in the Gemara, though. The Gemara quotes Rav Acha bar Yaakov, who says, Echad zeh ve'echad zeh derabanan. Both are derabanan, because according to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, we never left this idea that we've been speaking about throughout the shiur of matzah being connected at the hip to the korban pesach. Matzah is always, according to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, a mitzvah of the korban pesach, and the maror is something which is also connected to the korban pesach. It's Rava and we follow Rava's opinion, but Rava says that there is a specific mitzvah of eating matzah independent of the Korban Pesach. Now that is the idea, perhaps, that the Baal Haggadah says. It's basically what the Baal Haggadah is doing by taking the very same Mishnah and changing it. When Rabban Gamliel said his original halacha, okay, let's go back to that. Rabban Gamliel lived during the time of the Beit HaMikdash. He also lived immediately afterwards, and according to some historical records, this is a question, but it would seem that it's quite possible that the Korban Pesach will continue to be brought even after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Jews were still allowed to go up to Har HaBayit, and there are those who want to claim that at least for 50, 60 years or so after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, they continued to bring the Korban Pesach. Regardless, Rabban Gamliel was speaking about a reality where matzah was being eaten together with the Korban Pesach, and that's why matzah is just part of the Korban Pesach. Pesach, matzah, umaror. The three things that you eat together, and Pesach, al shum shenigalu avotenu b'Mitzrayim. That changes. That changes with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. That changes with when we no longer have a chiyuv of matzah, a chiyuv of the Korban Pesach, and now we only have the chiyuv of matzah, and now we need a separate reason to be eating the matzah. The separate reason is this flight to freedom that we are familiar with. Al shum shelo hispik b'tzeikam shel avotenu lahachmitz, because their dough didn't have a chance to rise. And this idea is something that the Netziv, in his commentary, the Netziv Rav Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, Yehuda Berlin says in his commentary to Sefer Dvarim, he says, Bizman hazeh, today, I'll just read it in the English, the matzah recalls the haste, which is why we mention this element today, and explains the deviance in the Haggadah from the terminology of the Mishnah. That is the dominant theme, right? Be it, and he says, whether it's the haste of the Egyptians at midnight or the haste of the Jews in the morning. This, basically what used to be a secondary theme for the Haggadah, for the Matzah, has become the primary theme. They're both mitzvot d'oraita. If we were now at Leil HaSeder with the Korban Pesach, when we eat our matzah, we're fulfilling two different requirements. We're eating the matzah as part of the Korban Pesach experience, and we're also eating it as part of the Geula experience of the following morning, or at midnight when the Egyptians stopped, were awakened to find their firstborn being killed. And these are two separate ideas, two separate themes, two separate motifs, which we need to be understanding as we are eating our matzah. But what has happened is that what once was the primary, the Korban Pesach, has now become the secondary. And what was the secondary, the idea of kebechipazon, and the theme that, going back to that argument amongst the Amoraim, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says doesn't exist at all. He believes that there's only the achilat matzah together with the Korban Pesach. But we follow the opinion of Rava. So what once was the secondary theme has now become the primary theme, at least until the Korban Pesach is revived. At the most that we have of the original theme is this idea of the afikoman, which, at least according to one opinion in the Rishonim, is representative of matzah eaten with the Korban Pesach, which we still eat at the end of the Seder. Now, the I just got it. So everyone hear me? Continuing? Okay, we're still good.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, fine. So there's now another theme. The other theme is the theme that we mentioned back in Sefer Dvarim here in number 4, that it is lechem oni, right? The bread of affliction, as we are familiar with. Now, that bread of affliction is something that we introduce our Haggadah with, right? We say, halach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction, the achalu avotana ba'ara de Mitzrayim, that our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt, kol dichvin yete v'yechol. So whoever is hungry should come and eat. We're all familiar with this. Now, this theme of oni, of affliction, we're going to see what the Gemara does with it, but on a on a pshat level of the pasuk of this bread of affliction. Now, this becomes I don't think it's a coincidence that we introduce our Seder, our Haggadah, with this particular text, this Aramaic text, which seems to be written outside of Eretz Yisrael. We say at the end of it, Hashata hacha l'shana haba ba'ara di Yisrael. Right? This year, now, we are here in the diaspora. L'shana haba'ah, next year, in the land of Israel. That is a something which becomes the primary theme, but it becomes the opening to our Haggadah. And the opening of the Haggadah is the achalu avatana ba'ara de Mitzrayim. It's not the matzah that we ate with the Korban Pesach. It's not the matzah that we are eating as we are leaving Egypt. It's the matzah that they ate while they were in Egypt. Now, perhaps, I'll just read this Avudram. The Avudram is a 14th century Spanish commentator, both halachicist, as well as he wrote an important commentary to the Haggadah. And in his commentary to the Haggadah on this portion of Halach Ma'anya, he says the following. The translation is mine for the most part. If you ask, why do we speak of the bread that our fathers ate in Egypt? Right? Why mention that at all? So, after all, their dough baked only after they left. So he quotes this Rav Yosef Ha'ezovi B'Shem Ben Ezra. And this Ben Ezra had been imprisoned in India. Hayash Shavui Bahodu. He had been imprisoned in India. V'hayu ma'achilinoto lechem matza. V'lo natnu lo la'olam chametz. So the rations that he received in prison were matzah. Right? Now, we can appreciate why that is our prison rations. We sort of can understand now he's going to give an explanation why. You could give a lot of reasons why in prison they would give prisoners matzah. It stores better. It doesn't become as stale as quickly. His rationale is the following. The matzah rationale of his captors was that the matzah was hard and does not digest as easily as chametz. As a result, less is necessary to feed the victims. In other words, when you have your prisoners and you want to do it efficiently and economically, you give them this hard bread, which is hard to digest, but is filling. And as a result, you don't have to produce nearly as much bread as you would if you were giving a chametz bread out. I recently read, meaning within the last few years, 12 Years a Slave, which is a memoir of a free African American who was kidnapped and spent 12 years as a slave. and it was later made into a movie as well. So it's really a harrowing tale of what he writes. But one of the things that caught my mind when I was reading it was that the standard rations on the plantations that he was enslaved on were a matzah type of bread that were given to him on a regular basis, because they would give it to him at the beginning of the week, and that would be his ration for the entire week. And that was just from an economical perspective and an oppression perspective, the best way for the operators of the plantation to feed their slaves. So the matzah, as a result, could very well be the same idea. If you take also another aspect that has been pointed out by different people, that the leavening process, the idea of chametz in general, was an Egyptian invention. And so basically, the leavened bread was the bread of the Egyptians. The unleavened bread, the matzah, was the bread of the slave. So here you have the lechem oni. And maybe, and let's now go back to the question of why are we eating the matzah with the Korban Pesach before they even leave? And the answer might be that it's a lechem oni, that the matzah, the korban of freedom, is being wrapped, literally wrapped, in the symbol of the oppression of the matzah. And it's being eaten together with the symbol of the bitterness of the slavery, of the experience, of the maror. And basically what perhaps the message is that in this geula, remember, they're eating it for the first time before they've even left. And you're being told that you are being freed right now, but remember the context, remember the slavery, that with the geula, you can never forget the slavery that God has redeemed you from. That becomes a symbol of redemption in of itself when they leave. Now, I'm going to take this one step further and say that perhaps the idea that, and this is kind of radical, it's actually something that I heard just this year on a shiur on a podcast, which I never thought about before. The podcast is Psychology and Halacha, and in the Parsha, it's on the Gush podcast feed, Keshet. The idea was that perhaps the Jews never even knew that they were leaving the following morning. Right? I asked, why didn't anyone prepare a sandwich? And the answer is that if you take a look, and I apologize, please take a look at these psukim after the shiur. Take a look at Perek Yud Bet in Sefer Shmot, from psukim Chaf Aleph through Chaf Chet, 7 psukim, and you'll see when Moshe relays the order to Bnei Yisrael that they should be leaving Egypt and they should be preparing the Korban Pesach, he does not mention the Makat Bechorot. He doesn't tell them, he says, prepare the Korban Pesach and God will protect you. But he never says that at midnight the Egyptian firstborn are going to be killed. He never says tomorrow morning you're going to leave. This leaving of Egypt might have come as a surprise. They knew that they were about to leave. They expected to leave maybe the following day. They prepared their dough. They figured they'd leave around noon, right? They'd wake up in the morning, they'd bake their bread, and they'd leave. And suddenly they're bechipazon. Suddenly they're being chased out in the morning, and they don't have a time to prepare the bread. They prepared the dough in advance. They were going to bake it, but they never had the chance to bake it, and so would have to bake on their shoulders. And the rationale here is that, well, maybe the surprise has to be a surprise. They have to leave bechipazon. That has to be the way that Pesach is. You can't tell people, be prepared to be surprised. You have to tell them, okay, you're going to be leaving, and then surprise, let's go, out now, leave. That is the way that the story plays out, so that the Geula basically reflects the Lechem Oni. And that now the very symbol of the oppression becomes the symbol of the Geula. But this is already found in the pasuk of going back to the Haggadah of the psukim in Sefer Dvarim. Lo tochal alav chametz shivat yamim tochal alav matzot lechem oni, and now we have the ki b'chipazon yatzata mimitzrayim. In other words, the two themes are joined together. It's not only lechem oni, it's not only b'chipazon, it's together. It is the lechem oni, it is the bread of affliction, but it also is the bread of the geula. It's also the bread that you are eating as you leave Egypt. Now, this has halachic ramifications as well. What are the halachic ramifications of this idea, this third theme, right? Because now, just to recap, we've had three themes for the matzah. One is the matzah as being part of the Korban Pesach. One is that, number two is that the matzah is the symbol of the flight of freedom. Number three is that the matzah is the bread of affliction, the lechem oni. And what we showed is that perhaps there is an overlay of these different themes and that they inform one another, but that they all leave their fingerprints on the way that we eat the matzah. The way that we eat the matzah in terms of the afikoman, that is the matzah of the Korban Pesach. The fact that we continue to have a chiyuv to eat the matzah, d'oraita, a Torah chiyuv, to eat matzah, even though there is no Korban Pesach, that is the matzah of the flight of freedom. And then this theme, which now we're going to see some of the halachic ramifications, this theme of lechem oni, which might explain why there was the matzah with the Korban Pesach in the first place, as well as understanding why it becomes a theme for the Jew, not only without a Beit HaMikdash, without a Korban Pesach, but the Jew who is enslaved in the diaspora, that he is still eating this lechem oni. He is feeling, on the one hand, he is where his forefathers were in Egypt, and is expecting to be redeemed from that reality of the diaspora. So now, let's take a look, however, where on a halachic level, the lechem oni plays a role. The Gemara in Brachot says the following: Amar Rav Papa, Hakol modim bepesach shemeniach prusa betoch shlema uvotzeya. So everyone agrees. Normally speaking, we have two chalot, let's say on Shabbat. We have lechem mishnah. We have two chalot on Shabbat. We have two chalot on Yom Tov. What do we do on Pesach? So on Pesach, we don't have a whole loaf. We have a broken loaf. That is based on the pasuk of lechem oni, the bread of, here not affliction, but the bread of the poor person. This idea, and because we started a little bit late, it's beginning to get late. There is a little bit more to add to this, but the primary theme is, if you think of the following way, we're going to take let's take a look at the Rambam. The Rambam takes this idea quite literally, and he says the following. The Rambam's Seder was a little bit different than ours. He says the following: Achar kach mivarech al netilat yadayim. So we're up to rachza in our Seder, and you make the bracha al netilat yadayim, v'notel yadav shniya, and you wash your hands a second time. Why? Sha'arei hisiach dato b'shat kriyat Haggadah. We can't rely on the orchatz of the Haggadah the originally at the set right after Kiddush, because we've said the Haggadah in the meantime. So now we wash again, and then Lokeach, the Rambam says, Shnei Rikikin. The Rambam only had 2 matzot at his Seder. Lokeach Shnei Rikikin, v'cholek echad mehen, and you break one of them. Now, when you break one, right, so basically the Rambam holds 1.5 pieces of matzah in his hand and makes the bracha motzi lechem min haaretz. And then you make the bracha of hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Why? Mipnei ma eno mivarech al shtei kikarot kishar yamim tovim. So why don't we make the bracha with 2 full loaves like other Yom Tovs? Shenemar lechem oni, because it says the bread of affliction, and the Gemara's explanation for that is mar dako shel ani beprusa. A poor person uses a broken piece. He doesn't have a whole loaf of bread. He only has a slice of bread. So that is the theme that is going on here for the Rambam. This is the opinion of the Rambam. It's the opinion of the Rif. It's others that basically say, the Briskers also, by the way, to this day, will use 2 matzot and not the 3 matzot that we're familiar with. The 3 matzot that we're familiar with comes from the following idea, that basically we try to combine these 2 different ideas. It's true that we have, I'm not going to read the Rashi inside, but basically this is the idea that Rashi says, shtei shleimot, you bring 2 whole matzot plus the broken piece. Now, we break the matzah not when the Rambam broke the matzah. The Rambam broke the matzah right before he ate the matzah. We break the matzah before we start the discussion of the Seder, before we start Magid, because we're going to use it in effect as a prop for the Seder itself. But what we're doing by having 2.5 matzot when we make the bracha is we're sort of squaring the circle. On the one hand, we have 2 matzot because that is lechem mishnah. We also have half a matzah because that is lechem oni. So this custom of having a broken piece of matzah is because of this 3rd theme that we've been talking about, the theme of the bread of affliction, that it's important that this matzah itself reflect the servitude and the poverty that we had in Egypt. Now, taking this lechem oni one step further is a midrash, or an agadah, I should say, in the Gemara, play on the words. Amar Shmuel, number 17, the Gemara says the following. Amar Shmuel, lechem oni ktiv. Right? It's pronounced lechem oni, but it is written as lechem ani. Right? The translation doesn't really bring this across. This was a cut and paste translation. The pasuk is written as an ani, but it's pronounced oni, and the drasha is the following: lechem she'onin alav dvarim, the bread that we read, that we recite things over. Right? The la'anot, to answer. So a play on the word of lechem oni. It's not the bread of affliction. Now it's the bread of talking. I guess that's, a good Jewish custom. You're afflicted, so you talk a lot, right? Jews know how to talk. They know how to complain. So this is the idea of lechem she'onin alav dvarim, that we recite many things about it. Now, this might be the source of this idea, getting back to Rabban Gamliel, Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach. Rabban Gamliel had said, if you did not say these 3 things on Pesach, lo yatzai yedei chavata, you did not fulfill your obligation. So which obligation did you not fulfill? It says you did not fulfill your obligation. Which obligation? That's somewhat open to understanding. There are really two possibilities. And not surprisingly, there's a machloket as to which of those two are we referring to. The Rambam says the following. The Rambam says that Kol mi shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu belel 15 lo yatsa yedei chavato v'dvarim ha'elu kulan hein nikra'in Haggadah. These things are what we call the Haggadah. Meaning, the Rambam says that if you do not refer to the Haggadah, if you do not refer to the matzah, you don't refer to the Pesach, you don't refer to the maror, you haven't fulfilled your mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, telling the story. It's important, Rabban Gamliel says, that it's not just enough to talk. You have to use multimedia tools. Here we're using multimedia tools in terms of the video conference, but the multimedia tool of the Seder is to use the Matza, it's to use the maror, it's to use the Korban Pesach itself, and to describe what you are eating, what you're consuming, what you're holding in your hands, what you're pointing to. That is the full mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. That's the lechem sha'onim alav dvarim harbe that the Rambam is talking about. The Ramban goes in the other direction. The Ramban says that don't take this idea so literally, that lo yatsa yedei chovato, that you did not fulfill your obligation, but velo sheyeh tzarich lachzor v'le'echol pesach matzah umaror. What the Ramban raises the possibility, he rejects the possibility, but he says maybe it would mean that if you are, let's say I only eat matzah, and I never said matzah zo al shum ma. Why am I eating this korban? Why am I eating this matzah? I never said it. So does that mean you didn't fulfill the chiyuv of matzah? So he says, no, you fulfilled matzah, you just haven't done it in the best possible way. But the idea that the Ramban is saying is that the matzah is that you are fulfilling the telling of the story completes the chiyuv of eating the matzah. It's not that that using the matzah to fulfill the completion or of this telling of the story. It's telling the story so that I have a better appreciation of why I'm eating the matzah. So this all comes from the idea of lechem oni. So just to sum up, what we've seen here are 4 different ways, maybe even 5 different ways of understanding the notion of matzah. And more importantly than just simply understanding different ways of matzah, they all leave their fingerprints. They all are reflected in the halacha. And what are they again? Is matzah a part of the Korban Pesach? And that's why we're eating the matzah, which is why we eat the afikoman. Number 2 is the idea of the matzah as being a theme of geula, of a flight to freedom, if you will. That is the matzah of that's the matzah of the Seder without the Korban Pesach, where we still have a chiyuv of matzah today. Then we have the 3rd theme of lechem oni, of the bread of affliction. And that theme of lechem oni we saw breaks down into 3 different directions. Some more based on pshat, some more based on the Agadah, based on the Midrash. The 3 aspects of lechem oni is the bread of affliction, which is the halach ma'anya, reflecting what was done in the Seder itself, in Mitzrayim itself with the Korban Pesach. and also takes on special importance for the Jew who finds himself in the diaspora in a reality where he has to imagine freedom, because freedom is not something which he really has with him. The second idea of lechem ani, of the poor person, the broken piece of matzah, which is what we use for our achilat matzah at the beginning of the Seder, either the 2 loaves that the Rambam had or the 3 loaves that we have today. And finally, the idea of lechem oni as being a primary tool to tell the story, either that we use it the way the Rambam understood it as being a prop for the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, or the way that the Ramban understood it, that we use the story to give more meaning and more depth to the matzah that we ate. I hope that all of you and all of us, in these difficult circumstances that we're living with today, however we're able to fulfill our mitzvot, so that we find the depth and the meaning in our achilat matzah and in our Seder, and that everyone is able to stay well and healthy, and should have, within the limitations of what we all are living through, a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. It's really wonderful to see all of you, albeit virtually, and I look forward to being able to see you all in person again after all of this is over.